All right. Now, my very special guest, very happy to be joined by, I think for the first time in 9 years, I think you were in the first year we were doing the PWI podcast, my old friend Colin Hunter of Kayfabe News and his filmmaking partner, Sara Geidlinger. They're working on a documentary that we're going to talk about here in a moment. But first, just want to catch up with Colin. What's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm great, and it's wonderful to be back. As you know, I was a kid who grew up reading PWI magazine, and then I got to write for PWI, and then to be on the PWI podcast with yourself and others. It's a thrill. It really, like, to be even involved with the magazine that was, like, to me, the New York Times or the Sports Illustrated as a kid. Like, that was the publication of note. To have any association with it, I love it.
Oh, I agree. And again, I've got a day job in the journalism business. But yeah, this is the one that's like the dream job, you know. Yeah. So I totally agree. What our times overlapped writing. So what years were you writing for PWI?
Oh man, that's a good question. I want to say like 2005 to 2010, roughly there. It was never a super rigid regular thing, but when they had an article with me in mind, I think every issue of not necessarily PWI, but one of the magazines, there was 3 or 4, you know, The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling. For a while there, I was thrilled. You know, the secret was they didn't have to pay me any money because I was free. But I know. I'll keep. Yeah, they didn't. And yeah, I think I actually got to go to the PWI office just once.
Yeah.
I was in Blue Bell, Pennsylvania, and even that, like, looking through the archives and meeting some of the people who are real, and then some of the people who are maybe their reality is in question. Even the editors at PWI kept up kayfabe even when I was there. They said, "Oh yeah, Matt Brock, he's just out to lunch." And
right,
Hunter's on assignment. Yeah.
Was there something in particular that they would like call on you for? Because in like my early years in PWI, I sort of became the Ring of Honor guy. I don't know why, but if there was Ring of Honor story, it would come to me.
Yeah.
Was there something that was sort of your specialty at the magazine?
My specialty sort of become what was known as the Editors Roundtable.
Oh, those are great.
A discussion between 4 or 5 different people, all in the magazine editorial board. And I hope I'm not like blowing kayfabe too much out of the water.
It's fine.
These conversations were somewhat fabricated, elaborate.
Those were a great exercise, right? Because like to capture the voice of different writers and have like this back and forth. I did a few of those. Those were fun.
I loved it. Writing dialogue is harder than people think, and writing convincing dialogue that does match each character's voice, even when some of those characters may not be real. That was a real joy writing those. And I would write some features. I remember my first one was about the Dudley Boys. And
Spike. My very first feature for PWI was about the Dudley Boys.
Oh, wow. I wonder if that's the initiation story.
Yeah.
I was so naive that Stu Sachs said, "Hey, Colin, we've got this idea. We want you to write about how Spike is trying to redeem himself among his brothers." And I said, "Okay, should I interview them? How do I do this?" And that's when Stu told me that I could sort of take some creative license with it. And I remember then meeting the Dudley Boys and showing them the story in PWI about them. And, you know, they knew the deal. They're like, "I never said that," but you know, they played along with it. And Spike said, "Boy, I'm really angry about this, aren't I?" You know?
Yeah. And suffice to say, somewhere along the lines like that's changed. And like I've told the story. I remember doing a story. This is probably already, you know, close to 10 years ago. And doing that, you know, like just fabricating a quote and hearing from Stu, like, "Did you talk to this guy?" And I was like, "No." And it was like, "Oh, it's a new day." Like, no, these are all on the up and up. So it's changed. Was there something about your time at PWI that kind of helped you find your voice in Kayfabe News as kind of a humorist?
Absolutely. Without doing the PWI writing, first of all, I don't think Kayfabe News would have occurred to me to do a satirical news site that's written in the same sort of deadpan journalistic voice as real journalism. And then writing for PWI was practice in writing in that kayfabe style. I'm writing about sometimes the most preposterous ideas and storylines and feuds and rivalries. and writing about them with this absolutely deadpan, straight-faced approach, which was how The Onion does its journalism. And I think, you and I both come from a legitimate journalism background, and I think people like us tend to love The Onion because, it's funny because it's true kind of thing. Journalism
Right.
has its own language and its own norms, and to take that Onion style and then apply it to wrestling news, I don't think I could have done it had I not been a real newspaper journalist and a PWI writer, where I'm writing about the subject matter with this. It's not tongue in cheek so much as there's just a little wink and a nod in
Yeah.
that style. And I tried to do that with Kayfabe News. That the joke shouldn't be like, here's the punchline, waka waka waka. It should be much more subtle than that.
It's so hard, and that's why I've always been such a big fan and so impressed by your work, because even having all that experience, the legit journalism background, the wrestling background, still 99 out of 100 people are going to fall on their face trying to do that, including myself, and so, and it's not just, here's where I get to just sort of heap praise on you, because it's not just that it's funny, which it is. It's that it's so smart and being so dumb, if that if you get it, and that really is like the highest like form of comedy. It's like, this is so dumb and brilliant,
Yeah.
and it's just great, and it's hard to do, and for every Onion there are a bunch that miss the mark by a mile, and I think the same with Kayfabe News. I might have told you this story years ago, but I remember working on like on April 1st, this is probably 15 years ago, and some parody site does a story, Bret Hart is dead, and that was it. That was sort of the extent of it. And then like, you get through all that's like, April Fools. I mean, zero comedy. And there are others that are a little better. Which is the one? Wrestle Crap, right? Wrestle Crap's been around for a long time. They do a decent job.
Yeah.
But it's all some of it is too much kind of like on the nose.
I think the challenge for some is that not being true, just not being true isn't enough. Like, a lie isn't a joke, it's just a lie. So there was one of those April Fool's type things that came out about Mick Foley. It says Mick Foley dead in car crash, and of course you read it and it's proven wrong. But Mick Foley, now I've been to a couple of his sort of stand-up spoken word things, and he actually uses that as an example. Like, when he see me in the audience, he said, "Oh, Colin from Kayfabe News is here." Like, you know how not to do that is just to make up a lie about a car crash. And then so he's sort of praised that idea that it's not done maliciously, and the lie isn't the point. The fact that it's untrue, I'm not tricking people, isn't necessarily the point. The joke is the point. The fact that it tricks people is kind of icing on the cake. If it starts to snowball and people are commenting like, how can this be true? And that's always fun when a story sort of takes off. But just publishing something untrue it's very easy and unclever. And I've seen there have been sites that come and go that sort of do the Kayfabe News thing. And they usually last about a week before they realize it's harder to do than it looks.
That's sort of like the next evolution of what you did is sort of how social media has exploded and changed. And now so much of it's become like the next level of enjoying your work is going there just to read comments and to get the people. And you do this like with all like good parody stuff, is like half the fun is like, all right, now let's find the people who think this is true and are outraged. So how much fun do you have doing that?
Oh, that's that's a real sort of extra icing on the cake. You publish these stories, and sometimes, social media being what it is, some things take off and some things don't, and some ideas are great and some aren't. But when certain ones take off and get a life of their own, and then you have people out there debunking them or spreading these ideas, and my favorite is when the wrestlers themselves play along and they'll help accentuate a joke. I already mentioned Mick Foley. He and I did a video where he confessed that his fall from Hell in a Cell was completely fake. There's wires and green screen and pillows, and but it worked because he went 100%. He committed to the bit, and when the wrestlers commit to the bits, it helps even more. That they'll help. I did a story. It's a stupid joke, but the joke was that Seth Rollins' middle name isn't freaking, it's Todd. Which is and so the next day Seth Rollins just posted Seth Todd Rollins on Twitter.
That's great.
So that's pretty satisfying when they get it. And I've seen actually WWE in their on TV, they'll take a joke or an element of a joke and use it on TV, which is, it doesn't happen all that often, but it's very satisfying when it does.
Is the flip side of that, because of the whole rise of like fake news and misinformation, that you've got to be a little more careful? I mean, does it affect the decisions you make, that somebody might not get that this is comedy, and all of a sudden, you know, something's going on and this thing, I kind of lose control of it and people think it's real?
Yeah, I do. You know, there's more unpublished drafts of kayfabe news stories than there are published stories. Because sometimes an idea will come to me, and you know, there's a few rules I have for myself, which is mainly try to focus only on these characters that are on TV, not the human beings that play them. You know, wrestlers are people too, and they go through their own personal struggles. So if some wrestler has a drug problem or a court case or had multiple run-ins with the law, I try to stay away from that. If their character on TV has gone all through this, that's fair game. And I try to make sure that I steer clear as much as I can from real life scandals, partly out of respect to the people, but partly out of a absolute desire to not get sued. And so usually if a story sort of takes off, it's because it's so it's ridiculous, but it's, you know, wrestling itself is ridiculous. So some of these stories are just crazy enough to be true, and that, you know, when you hit that sweet spot, like, that's insane, but this is wrestling, so it could be true. That's that's sort of the magic spot.
I've seen where you have touched on some, and again, I think this is sort of comedy at its highest form, when you touch on something that is sort of sensitive, and but do it in a way that is smart, and sort of like criticizing something in a way that's sort of like elevated. Including, I just saw I guess the week of the McMahon scandal breaking, and it was just that crazy week where, you know, we thought we'd need to record like a 4-hour podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I think the headline was like, you know, slow week in news or something like that, which is it's perfect. It's exactly.
Actually, I talked to Sarah about that, because I said, this whole Vince McMahon thing, I can't really touch it because people have been hurt badly. There's a court case afoot, and it's dirty laundry. It's not funny in any real way. So I said, I don't know if I can joke about this at all. But then the joke was, oh, everybody else is talking about this, so my joke is, oh, slow news week in wrestling.
Yeah.
Vince McMahon, he's in every headline around the world for all of these scandalous accusations, and my headline was, Vince McMahon, singer of 1987 hit Stand Back.
I saw that, you know, that's great. Yeah, I grabbed a few things just what I could find, and that was one of them. I mean, a few others that I just got such a kick out of. And this is the kind of thing, exactly what I was talking about, where people will think it's real, and then it's sort of the best of both worlds, because it's both funny and it's going to like piss people off. Cody Rhodes against WrestleMania pre-show match against Baron Corbin. I just love that. and because did you check comments on that? I didn't. Did were people freaking out?
I tend to not pay as much attention to comments now as I used to, which I think is probably a healthy life choice.
Same.
And sometimes I'll post something, and then I just kind of forget, and I go on with my own life. And then 3 or 4 days later, I look and see that, 800 people commented on this, and there's a big
and there's something to be said again about this day and age, because this is how like fake news gets around, is right? Somebody writes something up, and then it's passed by, you know, along until somebody, and nobody knows the source. It's like, it looks legitimate. Look, this is like a nice sleek wrestling news site. It must be real. What else was great? I love this one. For, you know, a lot of these, what's great is just like the timing, and it was a disgruntled CM Punk walks out of WWE, and I think did you post that the day that he showed up on Survivor Series? Which is so fantastic.
Yeah, sometimes the joke is timing. Like, if I can turn something around during the commercial break after a thing happens, like, people are like, holy crap, did you have that loaded up? But, you know, sometimes you can have a joke loaded and you're just waiting for the moment to unleash it.
So does it work sometimes that way, that, you know, that the light bulb goes off and you got to run over to the computer or put it down on your phone or something?
Yep, that's exactly how it works. And a lot of times there is no light bulb, and I sit down at the computer and I stare at a blank screen, and I think, well, what's funny in wrestling? And
Hard.
that means that I'll scan wrestling headlines, but then I'll go and scan real world news headlines, and see, what is often the joke isn't wrestling is the arena for a larger joke. I did a joke about how the only thing that can stop a heel with a steel chair is a babyface with a steel chair. It's that whole mentality around shootings, and it's the joke is the absurdity of the idea. The joke has nothing to do with wrestling. I'm just using wrestling as a way to elevate the joke.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sting in the news retired last night. I was looking for Sting headlines, and you had this is June of last year. Sting still desperately trying to get over with wrestling fans, which is just so great.
I think that was day after he came back, or he won something, and at age 60.
Yeah. So I mean, just great stuff. If you guys aren't following Kayfabe news, I talk about on the podcast a lot. That's sort of like the ultimate test for me is, will my wife and kids enjoy something, because none of them can give a damn about wrestling. And my wife subscribes to Kayfabe news now. She on her own, she sends stuff to me, cracking up.
That's amazing.
So what how has it grown? I mean, talking about, I guess it's something of a leap of faith when you first begin this, like any kind of business. Was it just sort of like this little side hustle? Maybe a few hundred people will get a kick out of it, and what has it grown to now?
I didn't even know if it'd be a few hundred. It was an idea that I thought a couple of my friends would enjoy and that I would enjoy. It occurred to me after talking to some wrestling. Colt Cabana and Mick Foley both are involved in comedy and wrestling, and I talked to them and had this idea, and really didn't know if anybody would pay attention. And but I was kind of having fun coming up with the stories, having my own little onion. So I wrote maybe a dozen or so before publishing anything, and so it would look sort of like a legitimate news site from day one. And like, I remember the first time a couple dozen people were on the site. I could see the analytics. I was like, holy crap, a couple dozen people are on the site. And then it grows over time, and you see it take off, and some of the stories go viral and end up at the top of Reddit and something, and you get these huge numbers. Kayfabe News, it just grew over time. And I told myself, as long as I keep enjoying writing them, and as long as people keep reading them, I'll keep doing them. And that was 11 years ago. I used to do it every single day, 7 days a week. I'd post a story. And that was just a personal challenge I put on myself. And the challenge is still there, but the
yes, that word. I'm not a journalist.
I know it's 3,000 some odd articles I think I've published.
Oh my gosh, really? Wow.
So
in what, 10 years, or how long has it been now?
10 or 11 years.
Okay.
And so I still try to do it several times a week. And but we're working on a documentary about wrestling, and now I'm actually involved in wrestling myself as a referee. So Kayfabe News kind of opened that door. Not just kind of, Kayfabe News really opened the door. Whenever I reach out to somebody now and say I'm making a documentary, by the way, I'm the guy from Kayfabe News. Generally, people say, "Oh, Kayfabe News, yeah, let's chat. I like that." So it's been a real entree to having the connections to even begin making a movie.
Yeah, so let's talk about the movie. Was your decision to make the documentary and just explore the life of a referee? Did that come out of sort of the humor side? In this ridiculous world, the kind of particularly ridiculous role of the referee?
That's part of it. The referee is such a crucial figure in that, they're part of every single match. But yeah, they in many ways, they're the dumbest person in an arena full of 15,000 people, right? The referee is kind of a running joke in wrestling, but also essential to the illusion that wrestling is. And nobody's ever really paid attention to the ref. I've never seen a documentary about the ref. And generally, we see hundreds of documentaries about every scandal and every triumph in wrestling. But the ref is a bit character at best in those stories. So I thought, for once, let's take the supporting character and make them the main character. And that just jives with my background in journalism. When I was writing for a newspaper, my beat was basically to find offbeat, untold stories. I sort of found the features that were in between other beats. So I was always looking for underdog stories and human interest stories about the person behind the scenes who you don't know makes it all work. And that was really the impetus. And it was one idea, like, why hasn't anybody ever told the story of the referee? And I pitched this idea to Sara and our late friend Marshall, thinking every time I pitched the idea to them or anybody, I thought they'll say, "Oh, that's dumb. Who cares about the referee?" But other, wrestlers were saying, "That's a good idea. That's a cool idea." So Sara and our friend Marshall, when I was just floating this idea, they said, "No, Colin, we're making this movie." And she and Marshall sent me a little video where she played Miss Elizabeth and Marshall played Randy Savage. And yeah,
Marshall had to tell me what to say.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Miss Elizabeth was.
Yeah. But you knew you wanted to make the movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, macho, we're gonna make a movie. So that was more than a year ago, and for the past year we've been traveling around to indie wrestling shows. The original idea was to follow me as I become a referee, and that is part of the movie. But what we've discovered is that it's only a part of a bigger movie that's full of interesting people and beautiful stories. And so we're focusing on some referees that are veterans and been doing it forever, and then some newcomers like me, and a second generation ref who's following in her father's footsteps. So we found this like beautiful human interest story wrapped into what was essentially kind of a kooky idea, like, what if I become a ref and we film it? That's still there, but it's so much richer than that.
Yeah, well, we thought it was going to be a little bit more comedy and a little bit more silly. Watching, the tallest, I don't know, are there taller refs than you?
I'm 6'3". I'm far too big to be a.
That's a no-no, right? That's
very imposing in the ring. And Ken Kensington, who's one of your mentors, I would say, is a bit of a tinier human who in it. We've got some great shots of the two of them working together. But what we thought was going to be filled with more comedy has turned into a beautiful story about the community that indie wrestling brings together every weekend. And it was. It's been a joy to film for over a year. I didn't know a lot about wrestling. I have a wrestling podcast with our late friend Marshall Ward that Colin mentioned. And
Unscripted Spectacle, a very good podcast
Thank you.
in which the premise is a person who knows everything about wrestling, and someone who knows almost nothing about wrestling, but learning.
Although when I met up with Keith Elliott Greenberg in New York last fall, he was saying, you can't claim that you know nothing about wrestling anymore. You have to shift. You have to change that.
Yeah.
It's true.
You've been to 15 indie wrestling shows in the past year. That's more than any sane person would ever.
Yeah. But I haven't been to like a pro wrestling show.
Well, they're all pro wrestling.
You know what I mean? Yeah, they're all pro wrestling. Correct. I'm sorry, what was that?
Like a WWE show? You haven't been?
I tried to go to a house show, but I didn't end up staying for the show. Just circumstances.
You got to do WrestleMania. I mean, just in terms of like those contrasts, right? The highest and the lowest. I mean, it'd be fascinating to get your take on.
It's funny. We went to Los Angeles to film, and WrestleMania was there, but we didn't get to see WrestleMania.
No, we were filming people.
Filming people at the wrestling convention.
Yeah.
Bill Alfonso and others for this documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so what's the pitch to become a referee at these shows? I mean, do you have to tell them, look, I'm making this movie. Would you let me be your referee? Yeah,
it's exactly it. There's an indie here. So I live in Ontario in Canada, and there's a indie 365 Pro Wrestling. Much like any mid-sized city or town will have its resident indie, and I've been going to them as a fan, just watching for years. And I said, I'm making this movie. Can I interview some people? And so at first we just went and interviewed some people. And then I went to training at a local wrestling school. And I
Off the Rope Studio in Kitchener.
Off the Rope Studio. It's
referee training or wrestling training, or are they one and the same?
Both. It turns out they're largely one and the same, especially at first. You have to know how to bump, at least basically, to understand what the wrestlers are doing and how not to hurt yourself if you do have to go down, and roles and things. So, but then essentially in training, I would referee training matches. So you get students and they're putting on a training match. And of course, we're all terrible. I'm a new ref. I don't know where to be. And there's a lot more to it than one thinks. But then over time, they deemed I was ready. So I'd get one match on a local indie show. And then I'd get 2 matches on a local indie show until just recently. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of the finale of the movie, but I reffed a 4-on-4 match with some of my favorite, like, I'm not really a sucker for the John Cenas and the Rocks of this world. I love a good low card comedy guy. So anyway, a bunch of my indie heroes, I was invited to referee a match in front of a crowd of about 800. And so that's how it goes. You know, started from in front of nobody in a school to working your way up. It's the same way the wrestlers would do. And I had to kind of earn my spot. 6 months ago, they wouldn't have let me ref on that show because I wasn't good enough yet. And maybe it'll be another 5 or 10 years before I'm even good enough to consider, you know, NXT. Not that that's a goal. I'm a 47-year-old man, but that's how it goes if this is done correctly. And what I've realized is that it's the repetitions. You have to go out and do it over and over again the way the indie wrestlers do. You don't. In very rare circumstances does a wrestler get to jump straight to the big leagues without going through the indie progress. Right. And that's, it's not just sort of paying dues. It's how you learn how to do it, how you get comfortable in a ring and know where to be and know where the cameras are and learn about timing. There's so much more to a match than is presented to the fans, which is good. You don't want the fans to know how the sausage is made. You don't want to give away the magic trick. But once you're behind the scenes and part of the magic trick, there's an awful lot going on to pull off this illusion. It's wrestling's far more impressive than I ever thought. Now that I'm involved, I'm even more impressed with the people who do it.
Same.
It's quite an incredible, it's not a sport, but it's an incredible performance art with elements of sport that I didn't fully appreciate my whole life until I actually got in with them. I said to somebody the other day, it's both more fake and more real than I realized. And more fake in the level of competition and trust and friendship. Sorry, the level of cooperation and friendship and trust is huge. But the realness, until you're in a ring and you've taken some bumps, you don't know what it feels like. And I guarantee it hurts more than people think.
Right. And the referee's job is I think you mentioned that if you're doing a great job, you won't even be noticed. But also, you know, the only reference point you have for being a referee is the time you've noticed the referee, right? So I'd imagine it is easy, you know, and it's sort of ironic with you being kind of in the parody business, but like it'd be easy to fall into just becoming a parody of the referee. And we've seen these even on some big stages, the ones that are sort of like it's so put on that it almost feels like you're making fun of them, right? So was it hard for you to hit that note? Was it maybe your goal at the beginning to kind of have some fun with it and do what I think a referee is supposed to look like, and somewhere along the way did you know, how does that evolve?
Yeah, I think maybe Sarah can speak. Like when I'm doing it, when you're in it, it's hard to sort of analyze how you're doing it. But I've realized that as a big guy, I need to use that to my advantage. So I need to really show authority and not be a pushover. And I'm working on that. You know, I can physically get between people and move them apart. And I think I should use that to my advantage. I can't pretend that I'm a small person. But what I've realized is that I think my character is a ref, maybe because I'm trying not to be the kayfabe news guy, but I'm deadly serious. And I was worried that I'd be having so much fun that I'd crack a smile and I'd laugh here and there. My first day of training, they told me that if I laughed, they'd slap me across the face. Then they slapped me across the face, just tell me what it feels like. You. Yeah, just a little warning shot. Say, here's what'll happen. But when I'm at it, it feels, I don't feel like I'm playing the role of a ref. I think
you are a referee now.
You're a ref, right?
You're a referee that gets invited to officiate matches.
And when people cheat, I'm angry.
You are.
That's great.
And that was a real learning experience for me where I thought, well, you're part of this show. I don't know why you're so worked up or nervous before it. Just go out and do your performance. But no, you're actually officiating something and you have to keep everybody in line, even though might be different from boxing or
and you have to be, there's always in the back of your mind, is this guy selling or is he hurt? And so
like as a camera person, I have often gone, like, really wanted to check on these new friends that we've made. Sorry to speak over you, but realize, oh no, they're just selling. They're selling it. Yeah.
And so that's, you're in there and you want the match to go smoothly, and you don't want to be the reason something gets screwed up. It's the act of being invisible 90% of the time, and then being exactly where you have to be, and like perfectly placed for that 10% of the time,
and rolling with it if it doesn't work.
And improvising on the spot. So there's a lot of improv that goes on, even when there's the best laid plans, and you have to be able to think on your feet. So I think my character as a referee is sort of the opposite of how I approach wrestling. But as a referee, I'm deadly serious, and sometimes the heels will try to play with me, or someone will try to get a laugh out of me, and there's a part of me that's like having the absolute best time of my life, like, oh my god, I'm in a wrestling ring, I'm doing this, I'm in a match, I can't believe it. And then the other part, the front facing part of me, has to have this like really stern look and be watching the holds really carefully.
And you might see that in the film. You might catch these glimpses that we filmed of Colin really trying to pull back and bring himself back into the referee, and it's not put on. He's so excited, like a child. I think, sorry to call you a child, in the ring. You're so excited to be living out this dream. That's what we're picking up when we're filming. But then you really have to bring yourself back into that character and make sure that you're officiating. And also, we've made such strong relationships with the rest of the referees that are in our film. Harry, Ken, Cameron, Emily, Stephen, many others.
Lots.
Earl Hebner. Yeah. So you've made such strong connections with these other referees that when Colin gets out of the ring, he's going to hear it if he messes up. They're going to keep him in line. They're going to tell him he's not wearing the right pants, or his shoe was untied, or he was too slow on a count, or too fast, or me, I thought you would hurt yourself. At well, I won't say the show because it's in the movie, but I thought Colin had hurt himself in the ring. And when he came out, I was like, are you all right? When we were done filming, he's like, no, I was like, that's what I do when my shoulder hurts and I've been out for too long.
I was learning, once you start watching referees for a project like this, I can't watch wrestling without focusing on the referees. Now, it's a bit of a problem that I'm almost exclusively watching the refs, which is actually, it may sound boring, but it's bringing a whole new level of enjoyment for me, because I'm seeing, oh, that's when he's relaying a message or a time cue, or that's when he's telling him that guy's hurt and he has to, I'm seeing all these little nuances.
And I've seen more real life wrestling than like WWE and or whatever else is on TV. Like, I've seen more real wrestling. So like,
what do you mean?
I'm old, like in life. Like a real life IRL wrestling.
Oh, like in person.
I'm not watching any recorded. The only recorded wrestling that I'm watching is what we've filmed, right? So I'm not even watching it from that perspective. And I think sometimes when we're
and you're sort of choosing your own camera shot, because you could be watching the ref the whole time. Yeah.
And I think that when we're out filming on location, I think that people must be wondering why we have 1 to 4 cameras on the ref at all time. On the action.
That is fascinating. Does it give you a different appreciation for like the great referees? And you mentioned Earl. He's probably as famous as anyone, but so many others over the years. And I don't want to necessarily name names, but do you look back and say, this guy wasn't as great as people say he is, or somebody who was maybe underrated? I mean, maybe that's an easier one to name. Is there somebody who doesn't get the props that they deserve?
I think it's tricky because every ref has their own style, and it's of course there's not that much leeway for creativity. They wear the same outfit and enforce the same rules, but some are very, very fast moving. They'll leap and slide from place to place, and others are more methodical. And so I've been watching all the refs that we've been interviewing and watching how they do it, and there's very different styles. Some are more demonstrative, and some are more by the by the books, and so I'm trying to take the best elements of each. I it's hard to sort of rank them in terms of quality, because so much is determined by the booker and what the match calls for. I just watched what I consider possibly the greatest wrestling match of all time, which is Hulk Hogan versus The Rock at WrestleMania 18. And not because I think it's a great technical wrestling match. It's not. They barely do anything. It's very light. And but the crowd, they've completely got the crowd in the palm of their hands. 70,000 people just going nuts. But I was watching the referee through that.
And, who's the ref for that?
Was it Mike Chioda? Yeah. And so he takes a bump from The Rock, and he takes it's WrestleMania, so I don't think anybody wants to make anything look flimsy. So he takes a big bump from The Rock, and he goes flying. And he's down for a good 5 minutes, just not moving, which of course allows all the shenanigans to happen and the crowd to get involved. And I watch things like that. Like, how does the referee take a bump, and how long do they stay down, and how do they? I sort of mimicked, when he does come back to life, he's barely alive, and he counts the slow 3 count. And I got to do that a couple weekends ago. I was refereeing a match, and the bad guy manager yanked me out of the ring at the 2 count, and I splat to the floor, and then of course I eventually get back in and get to do the pained 2 count, and so in my head I'm emulating people like Mike Chioda and Hebner, all the people you see on that I grew up watching on TV.
Yeah.
As a kid, I tell this story. I assumed as a kid that these WWF referees were part of some organization, some licensed refereeing,
right?
And they came in.
I thought that when we started this, I was like, "Oh, he's gonna have to get registered."
Yeah, but I remember I went to a house show once when I was a kid, and I saw Jimmy Corderas referee a bunch of matches. Then I saw him get in the ring truck and drive the ring truck to the next show. I was like, "Wait a second, the referees are not this elite class of adjudicators. They're part of the team, like they're part of the roadies too." And so that always stuck with me. Like, what do the referees? Who are they, and what do they actually do? And turns out when you're a referee, you absolutely are on road crew. You're expected to set up the ring on the indie shows for sure. I've set up and torn down a bunch of rings. That's sort of, the referee is the sort of low person on the card.
Let me ask you about that. In terms like who becomes a referee, is it often just somebody who is around and does other jobs? And I imagine it varies from place to place. There is a thought, and I think in some cases that this fills the bill, that it is the aspiring pro wrestler that never makes it or something like that. I mean, in WWE, you've seen a lot of Indian wrestlers, and you can tell the ones because they're in particularly good shape. So is there some common thread through who becomes a referee?
I think what we've discovered is it can be anybody. One of the stars of our movie, Emily Parker, from Eastern Canada, her father was a referee for years and years, and he passed away from cancer 8 or 10 years ago, I think. And she's following in his footsteps, and that's her motivation. And Harry D, who's a legendary ref in Canada, he grew up among all these wrestlers, the missing link in Hamilton, Ontario, and he grew up in the scene as a kid who was like fascinated. So he got in sort of that way, and now he's a veteran. I never wanted to be a wrestler. Of course, any kid who watches WWF, I pretended when I was walking down a hallway that I was giving high fives and I was going to the ring, and my friends and I would have little backyard, not a league, we just fool around. But it was never a dream to be a wrestler for me, but it was a dream to be involved somehow behind the scenes. So I always wanted to be a writer for WWE. Now I don't think that's all that great a job either, to be honest, but getting to be part of the show without necessarily being one of the wrestlers was sort of a big motivation for me. But then, another star of the film, Ken Kensington. He's the one who's quite small, full of energy, and he did want to be a wrestler. And he said it very frankly. He said, "I dreamed of being a wrestler, and then I stopped growing." And that was, he realized that in wrestling school, there was no way he could be taken sort of seriously against
But
all these bigger guys.
He's strong, he's quick, he's hardworking, he's focused.
He's sort of the perfect ref.
The perfect ref. Yeah.
Do you find that the referees are accepted among the wrestlers as a one of their own, or is there that delineation even behind the scenes?
I think both. I think both are true, but I've discovered, I think partly because I'm focusing on the referees, that I haven't noticed any cliquiness backstage, any exclusion.
So friendly. It's the friendliest place I've seen.
It really, it's sort of known among wrestling people that wrestling locker rooms have a strict code of etiquette. You shake everyone's hands,
and they do, but it's once you're past that little gate, and you're welcomed, and there's no real hazing or initiation that happens. But once you've shown that you're here and you're full of respect and you've asked permission, it's a friendly community of people coming together to have fun. Yeah,
and for the most part, the last thing any of them want to do is hurt anyone.
That's right.
They all want to leave the show with 0 injuries. And that's considered a successful show. The audience is happy and nobody gets hurt. So this environment backstage of mutual respect, it extends to the referees and all the top wrestlers. We've interviewed Al Snow, and people who really sort of study the art of the performance, and the veterans will say, "Oh, the referee is absolutely essential," and that only poor wrestlers will ignore the referee or not include the referee in part of the planning of a match. And I found that the more inclusive the idea is in planning the match with the referee, even if the referee doesn't really play a major role. I've refereed plenty of matches where it's hey, break that choke and 1, 2, 3, and that's that. But if the referee is aware of the main plot twists and narrative structure of a match, where the heel is really going to start antagonizing the crowd, the referee can help accentuate without stealing the show. The whole idea of the referee is to accentuate what the wrestlers are doing and make that story even louder, especially for people in the audience who don't necessarily, at indie wrestling shows, there's always going to be some first timers who don't necessarily know that you have to break at 5 or that a rope break happens. So the referee is sort of an envoy to the audience saying, well, here's how this world operates. Here's the rules that they have to operate within.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a good point, because you think about it, like you become a wrestling fan and you never sit down and review a rule book or something like that, but you come to know all these things, and by and large, I guess you learn them from the referee. Well, I want to ask you about sort of just philosophically, because we've seen this change over the years, and you and I growing up kind of in the same era of pro wrestling, you knew the refs' names, and Monsoon and Heenan would reference them regularly. You knew Earl Hebner and Danny Davis and Joey Morella and Dick Roll and all these. And then more recently, certainly under Vince McMahon in the last 10, 15 years, there was like this edict of like, these people don't have a name, right? I mean, they have to be completely anonymous. They're just the official. And now with Triple H, Paul Levesque taking over, that seems to have shifted somewhat back to at least these people have a name. But then there are other extremes, very different in AEW, where like an Aubrey Edwards has very much become a personality, and some people are down on her and down on AEW about it. So where do you think that sweet spot is about how a prominent or anonymous referee should be?
I don't think there should be sort of a hard and fast rule. I think it should depend on the match and the show that is happening at a given time. Like most of the time, I think for it to work, for the wrestling to work overall, the referee should be anonymous and invisible most of the time. If the referee is always involved in something, then you're not surprised when shenanigans unfold. But I think there's, even at the indie level where I'm performing, at some of the shows it's announced, oh, Colin from Kayfabe News is our referee tonight. And at a couple of those shows, I've been kind of a heel referee where, I've done something that's benefited the bad guy. And in that case, it's been set up through the show. Like, okay, here's a referee, here's his identity, and he's making a movie, but here's some reasons you should dislike him. And that by the end, I got ref bumped by Madman Pondo, and I got skewered in the head, deathmatch style, by Warhead. And and that way, like, that was kind of a finale, or one of the finales of the show, because we had established very early on that I was kind of a referee that people wouldn't like. I was trying to impose restrictions on the show, like, you can't do this because we can't have it in the movie, right? And it was all a ruse for the bad referee to get what was coming to him in the end. And that's an exception to the rule, I think. That wouldn't work if it happened on every match. But occasionally, when the referee, the greatest referee spot of all time, in my opinion, was the switcheroo referees with
oh my god,
Earl and Dave Hebner.
Yeah.
You can only do that once,
Sure.
maybe twice in a century. So
Yeah.
And I would argue that because we're making a film about wrestling referees, that they should be celebrated.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be silent. That we're going to, like, I know it's not the same character that's in the ring, putting on the show. It's not the same thing as the wrestlers. But because we're making this full-length movie about referees, I think that they, deserve a spotlight. They're putting in a lot of hard work on the regular.
I feel like, referees shouldn't always get the spotlight, but this one time when we're doing it, they should.
That's the time.
Right.
So I would argue, like earlier, Al, you said that you would like to write stuff that that your wife would want to read, or that people who aren't wrestling fans want to read. And I was not a wrestling fan when I started my podcast with Marshall Ward or this project with Colin, but I am now. But I would say that this movie is not just for wrestling dorks. I'm a wrestling dork now. Not an insult. I'm a wrestling dork. I'm a convert. It's not just for us. It is for everyone, because it does have that human element to the story of these are people, hardworking people through the week who are just trying to have some fun on the weekends and bring joy to others.
Yeah,
I can tell that's true because I was going through footage that we filmed. Footage that we acquired, and it brought a tear to my eye. And I knew what was going to happen, but there really is, like anything else, people are doing this. People dive into a hobby, whether it's refereeing or wrestling or macrame or skydiving, because they find something that they couldn't find anywhere else, whether it's a thrill or a family or inclusion. Yeah. And we found that with basically all the wrestlers, the wrestling show that they put on is what's there for the audience. But the going to the show and planning the matches behind the scenes and hanging out with the people and
dragging your kids along.
Yeah. And people involved in wrestling are generally doing it for really, I think, beautiful reasons. They've found camaraderie and mental health in a lot of cases, and belonging. It's so funny that wrestling presents as this battle, this violent battle, and it's so not that. To make it look that good, to make it look like a battle, you have to actually be in full cooperation with someone you trust. And it sort of helped me fall back in love with wrestling. The pandemic kind of, when televised wrestling didn't have any fans, it lost a lot of its luster for me. And when I could go to indie shows and sort of feel that energy, it's brought back not only brought back, but I think I like wrestling more than I ever did.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I mean, you got a different role in it now. I mean, you're seeing it from the inside out. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is the best seat in the house. Like, you cannot have a better seat to watch a wrestling match than being the referee. It's pretty amazing. That's the second best.
Is that challenging sometimes, that like you're just watching a match and like, oh wait, that's right, I'm supposed to be reffing this thing, and you're just kind of enjoying watching a really good match?
I have these moments where there's someone that I've watched on TV, and I'm in the ring with them, and I just watch them walk by in the outfit that they wore on WWE TV, and it's surreal. I'm like, wait a second, what am I doing here? And there's been times when there's a choke in the corner or a double team, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And I'm thinking, oh no, 1, 2.
Right.
So I hope those things aren't noticed, but when I watch back the footage, I can see myself snapping back into like reality of, oh, I have a job to do. I'm not just hanging out here for fun.
Yeah. So how do we see this movie? Is it done? Is it ready to go? I know I thought I read June you're looking to put it out, right?
Yeah, June's the plan to do a screening here in
Kitchener, Ontario, at the Apollo Cinema.
Yeah, Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. We've got 2 screenings, June 6th and 8th. And the film is not finished, but we are deep in editing now. We've largely finished filming. So we spent about a year or so at indie shows and filming all over the place. And once the screenings are done, then the plan is for festivals and streaming.
Great.
So ideally, fans will be able to see this either at their local film festival or at on a streaming service. I don't know, in the coming year or so. That's the plan. What we do know is that it's a really good movie, even though it's not done yet, just because we know all the people and the stories involved.
Yeah, it's better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, which is a nice thing. Sometimes, you know, as a writer, there were times when I would approach a story and I'd have high hopes, and the story just doesn't quite pan out. And then there's times when you go in not expecting much, and this whole new world opens up. And that latter thing is what's happened with this movie.
I imagine that with and I don't know the first thing about documentary filmmaking other than enjoying watching them, but different than anything else, you don't know what the story is, right? When you say, I mean, you want to do a documentary about a subject, but as you're putting it together, you actually don't know what the story is.
This has happened. Exactly. This has happened with every film I've worked on so far. I start with this idea and I think that we're going in one direction, and then the story ends up presenting itself. And in this one, I really didn't know it was going to be such a beautiful story about humans coming together in the community that they've built for themselves and each other. I really didn't anticipate that at all, or that there would be such a large mental wellness aspect, people looking for acceptance and for, a place for family. That's it, for family.
Yeah. Well, I'm sold. I definitely want to check it out. Can't wait. Where can they follow you? I know your social media stuff. You've been actively promoting it. Is there a big clearinghouse for all? What's the name of the movie?
The movie's called The Ref Didn't See It! Exclamation point.
I fought so hard. I didn't get it at first. I get it now. But you can find it at therefmovie.com and follow our story there.
Okay, excellent. Guys, thank you so much. Love to have you both back on just to talk more wrestling, talk more kayfabe news, more ridiculousness of pro wrestling.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.